growing up in Central California, we have a large Hispanic community. And I grew up, our community is very, very, very mixed of everything, from blacks to browns to Asians to whites to, I mean, Armenians to, I mean, everything. I mean, that's just, and a lot of that's just California. But Central California, because of all the agriculture, you've got really a lot of different denominations in here. And I was just always raised that I wasn't raised any particular. They never said, don't be this, don't be that. But it was always just treat people fairly, son. Real simple. Just treat people fairly. Well, I tell you, it was really driven home for me personally when I was dating this Hispanic girl back in high school. And she was from a different area that really tended to stay to themselves. And the fact that she was dating a white Irish boy, the guys around her neighborhood didn't like that.
I can imagine, yeah.
Well, so when we would go to dances and things like that, man, I was getting the elbows in the ribs. I was getting shoved up against the wall when I walked into the bathroom, stuff like that. Just a lot of intimidation things, And I remember going to a couple of dances where I was the only white boy in this whole arena. And because my best friend was Mexican, he was dating her best friend, so the four of us would go out. And so I was the lone white guy. And I remember the feeling that I would get when other people were trying to intimidate me. And then it came to a head. I'm literally sitting in a car with this best friend of mine when two of this gal's buddy friends that didn't like us dating, one of them comes up and we're sitting there and the window's open and one of them reaches in and pulls me halfway out the window and the other guy just starts pummeling my face. I mean, he hit me so many times, so hard before my buddy could jump out of the car and come around and stop him, that my face looked like an overripe watermelon that had just been cracked open. And so he runs me home and drops me off, and I go in the house and I'm, of course, who's there but my dad. And at that point, my initial reaction was, Dad, we need to load up and we need to go pay some retribution here, I mean, but once I got the bleeding to stop, any facial wound bleeds so fast. And I'm in there and I'm trying to stop it. And now being a father with young sons, I can only imagine how my dad felt emotionally. But yet he sees me and he says, okay, who did this to you, son? Who did this to you? And my response was, Dad, the Mexicans, they jumped me, And all I remember is I'm like trying to, I can't even see, my eyes are swollen shut. And he's like, so I can't really see him. And he keeps asking me the same question. And I'm like, damn, how many times I got to answer you, Dad? I said, the Mexicans, they jumped me, they jumped my ass. And finally, when I could sort of see, and I'm looking at him, and he's asked me for now the fifth time, or however many times, who did this to you? And I finally was like, well, Luis and Manuel, and I named them, and he's like, okay, son, I know you're upset, but that's who jumped you. I was like, what? And he goes, you were saying the Mexicans jumped you. The Mexicans did not jump you. Luis and Manuel, they jumped you. They're the ones that have problems.
This is when, in the late 60s?
This would have been the 70s, mid 70s, early 70s, 72, 73 to be exact.
Okay, that's.
And my dad is like, that's who jumped you. You were trying to stereotype all the Mexicans, son. They didn't do this to you. Those two guys, they did that to you. And it wasn't like, now let's load up and go out and kick their asses, but it was like, that's who did it to you. And when you're sitting there at that age, and I had anger, but I mixed with pain, and you're trying to be a man, but at the same time, you got the little boy inside of you that just wants to go over and cry to his mom and say, oh my God, look at my face, At first I was like, Dad, do you really have to use this moment as a teaching moment right now? And to this day, I have thought about that incident hundreds of times. for the 8 years that I was a street cop, I cannot tell you how many times I would think of that, because I knew people would just see that uniform, and you can tell by their body language. A lot of people are just afraid, just plain afraid, or they're intimidated. And it was like, I didn't like that. I was like, wait a minute. If I came in here and I was in a blue t-shirt rather than a blue uniform, you wouldn't be passing this judgment. But because of this uniform and whatever past experiences they or their families have had, they have this sense of intimidation or anger or whatever. And I thought, you have to control this. You've got to set an image that changes that, Tom. This is what I'm telling myself. Do not stereotype people. And so maybe, I don't know, maybe I would have been like so many of these other cops, like so many of my own friends and colleagues, that after a period of time, they have all formed these opinions. But for me, this one situation, you know, they always say God has plans and all this stuff. Maybe this was one of those. Maybe this was a reason why I needed to get my brains beat out by somebody and have my father turn that into a teaching moment. Do not cast a net over an entire class or group of individuals because of the actions of one or two.